and no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 9:30 on Thursday, June the 29th. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So a very busy show today. The countdown is on as the Court of Appeal is set to rule this morning on the legal challenges over the government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. Stay tuned for that. We'll bring you the very latest as it happens.
Big story. And 1 week on from the catastrophic implosion on board the Titanic submersible, the US Coast Guard has started to salvage the wreckage and there is this presumption of human remains.
The Queen of Pop, music superstar Madonna, was rushed to intensive care after being found unconscious in her New York City apartment at the weekend. The latest world tour has been postponed and her family say that they feared they might lose her. We're going to have the latest on her condition.
And the latest finances for the King have been released, revealing the monarch is facing the same inflation pains as the rest of us. I think he's got a bit more in the bank than the rest of us, actually. We'll have the latest figures on the King's finances right here.
Yeah, the idea that the King is suffering the same inflation pressures as all of us. Not quite.
Yeah, sleepless nights, tossing and turning. How am I going to pay those bills?
Now, let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address, as always. But first of all, here are your news headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning. It's coming up to 9:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Asylum seekers appealing Home Office plans to send them to Rwanda will hear the outcome in court today. The High Court dismissed initial objections, but individual asylum seekers and asylum aid have been allowed to challenge the decision. The proposed illegal migration bill gives the government powers to detain and deport illegal migrants. It aims to fulfil the Prime Minister's pledge to stop small boats. The Privileges Committee has criticised Boris Johnson's allies, saying they took it upon themselves to undermine procedures of the House of Commons by criticising its inquiry. They include Nadine Dorries, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. It's after the former Prime Minister was found to have repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID breaches in Number 10. The US Coast Guard says presumed human remains have been recovered from the wreckage of the Titan submersible. It comes after debris from the craft was brought to St John's Harbour in Newfoundland yesterday, where it was seen being unloaded by a crane. A formal analysis of the remains will be conducted by medical professionals. Investigators say the evidence will provide critical insight into the cause of the tragedy. And households are being advised to submit meter readings to their energy suppliers before Saturday. It's ahead of Ofgem's lowered price cap following falling wholesale prices, which comes into effect on July the 1st. The average household energy bill will fall by £426 a year from next month. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, the Court of Appeal is set to rule on whether the government's plan to deport illegal migrants around it is lawful. We're expecting it any moment now.
So joining us for more on this and some other big stories today is our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Good morning, Tom. Just explain to us what the significance of this legal hearing will be today.
Well, it's a huge moment, of course. The government has been successful in its previous attempts to sort of get this thing off the ground, for want of a better phrase, or perhaps a
very
metaphor.
apt phrase.
We wanted to get off the ground, quick.
Yeah.
They wanted to get off the ground. The government has so far passed each legal hurdle, but there have been problems along the way, particularly with regard to that original flight that was sitting there on the tarmac, people on board. ECHR interventions meant that one by one the individuals were picked off, even though the plane had the right to fly. What we're seeing now is just more and more of that sort of steady progress of trying to clear all of these legal hurdles, and we should expect something around 10 a.m. with regard to this hearing.
If we're going to talk to lawyers about this, Tom, if they succeed, we know there'll be an appeal then by charities and various other groups to the highest court, the Supreme Court. Can they still put a flight up in the air if they've got to wait for the appeal process to be exhausted? Do we know?
We don't know.
Right.
It depends, I suppose, how bold the government wants to
Well, they're
be.
not very bold, are they?
I would expect that the more rule-abiding, legalistic, not rule-abiding, but sort of sticking to the spirit and the letter of these things, the government might well want to wait until that appeal is done so that it doesn't complicate the process. But I don't know the precise answer to that.
Sure.
So I'm not sure the government does.
Huge story about Thames Water. It's doing my head in. I mean, is this government seriously going to take public expense, Thames Water, one of the biggest water suppliers in the country, into public ownership because they've got £14 billion in debts when they made £400 million profit last year?
Well, the government isn't saying that it would want to nationalise this permanently. There's been some hyperbole, I think, in some of the reporting about this. They've used a specific phrase, actually, one that's being bandied around is a special administration regime, a temporary special administration regime. That is one option for what may happen to Thames Water. That's basically temporary nationalisation, although the government really doesn't want to say that word. And interestingly, even though the government seems to be flirting with this, the Labour Party has been saying, no, we absolutely shouldn't nationalise Thames Water, saying that they have to put the system right themselves, that the government shouldn't take it on. So it's interesting. It's almost as if these two parties have sort of swapped ideologies.
Keir Starmer was backing taking companies like the water back into public ownership, one of his many U-turns. And actually, I think the public would be on his side if he said he was going to renationalise water industries.
Well, it's interesting because, of course, there are some issues with the structure of Thames Water that might not be down to who owns it. So, for example, the FT has been reporting one of the reasons why this reported £10 billion in debt has just exploded in the last year, could well be to do with the way in which the income to Thames Water is linked to CPIH inflation, that's the Consumer Price Index with housing added, whereas the debt is linked to RPI inflation, the retail price index, which is running at a much higher rate. It's much more fluctuating and is used much less these days. But because the debt is with RPI and the income is with CPIH, that gap has just exploded, and therefore the debt problem has got a lot worse. Perhaps it was less of an issue in a low inflation environment, but in a high inflation environment, that has been a clear issue. That's just one little part to all of this, but it does start to begin to show that perhaps just who owns this thing isn't the real problem here.
It's the worst company for leaks, Thames Water. It has an estimated 630 million litres a day.
Shocking.
That leaks from its pipes. And yet it's supposed to service 15 million customers. It's quite easy when you hear the phrase Thames Water to think, oh, it's just a few people in London.
It's the largest in the United Kingdom.
That's right. And the chief executive, Sarah Bentley, she stood down, didn't she, with immediate effect on Tuesday. There's surely, though, Tom, this is just about a restructuring issue because their income still actually exceeds the costs for this company, but their debt is, as you say, is just increasing so much interest every day that they can't keep on top of the particular debt. Surely in these situations, it's not up to the government to come in and help. It's for the business and the market to decide how to restructure it and then just give it time.
Well, this is why the government isn't actually committing to this sort of temporary nationalisation or all of these things that have been discussed. What the government has said is that everything must be on the table and that they're looking at ways in which they may step in, but they may not. And of course, Rebecca Powell yesterday, the Environment Minister, speaking in response to this urgent question on this very issue in the House of Commons, was saying that there is strong liquidity in the company, was always talking up the confidence in it. Now, strong liquidity is quite a funny thing to say about a water company, but also potentially the government does see a path through here whereby a special administration regime, to use the technical phrase, may not be necessary. But again, this is an uncertain path here. We don't know where we might end up.
These water companies are a scandal, aren't they? They've been making huge profits, giving large dividends to shareholders and doing nothing about cleaning up our rivers and pumping so much pollution into them.
I think a lot of people will be rightly aggrieved at the perceived lack of investment into our creaking infrastructure here. So much of it Victorian even. And yet the level of investment under privatised water companies is higher than the level of investment was when they were nationalised. Now, neither were good enough.
No.
That's not to say there's been enough investment into this stuff. Clearly there hasn't. But it is actually a higher level of investment than when it was nationalised. And one of the reasons here is that when the government owns something, they respond to not market incentives, but political incentives. And if one year, for example, there's more hollering about pensions or more hollering about free school meals or whatever it is, the government's attention may well be on that, and they'll let things that seem less pressing, like infrastructure that may well have only been 10 years old in the 1980s, they'll let that sort of sit.
And we shouldn't think, anyway, that taking it back into public ownership is a panacea. Scottish Water is state-owned. They've got £4 billion worth of debt, and they are pumping massive pollution into Scottish rivers every year.
And you can see now that all of these potential pollution sites are monitored in the United Kingdom in a way that no other country monitors all of these waterways. So, frankly, we don't know how polluted the rivers are in Germany or in France. We do know how polluted our rivers are in the United Kingdom. Now, that's a stick with which we can beat ourselves because we can see the particulars there. But also we know that Wales has nationalised its water as well. And if you look at one of these maps that the water regulators now produce of where the potential outflow is of this stuff, Wales is highlighted as a particular area of concern, and that's under a nationalised system. So, again, no easy answers. Clearly nothing, it's not good enough as things stand, but the question is, would returning to the system where even lower investment was the experienced reality, would that be the best answer? Potentially not.
States can't run things. Tell us about this ridiculous privileges committee, Tom.
Yes, this is yet another report from the Privileges Committee. Of course, this was the Privileges Committee that was called by some allies of Boris Johnson a kangaroo court in its investigation into whether or not he misled Parliament. Well, they have been really rather aggrieved at the fact that some allies of Boris Johnson have been, in their minds, undermining their work and, in their words, performing a coordinated campaign in order to intimidate members of that committee. That's what they think. And so they've written up a new 14-page report highlighting examples of this sort of behaviour and naming members of Parliament.
Haven't they got anything better to do? Honestly. We feel like we've got a government who can't even provide clean water for us at a realistic cost, and they're dealing with this. Go on, Tom.
They talk about some of the most disturbing examples of a coordinated campaign to interfere with the work of the committee. Now, they list these examples from Nadine Dorries, Mark Jenkinson, Michael Fabricant, Brendan Clark-Smith, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Andrea Jenkins and Priti Patel. Those are the MPs that are listed here. And some of these egregious examples include Michael Fabricant tweeting on the 9th of June, "Serious questions will need to be asked about the manner in which this investigation has been conducted."
And what's wrong with that?
Well, it's an egregious example. It's what's
self-important, pompous.
The phrase that they have been using is quite extraordinary here. Yet disturbing examples. Now, if we want to look at the technicality of this, Erskine May, the rules by which Parliament is run, does have things to say about how the Committee on Privileges has to be left alone, and speeches and writings reflecting upon the conduct of members as members must be treated analogous to their molestation on account of their behaviour in Parliament. That's a quote from Erskine May, if you couldn't tell. So the rules of Parliament say this committee must be left alone, and so on that technical level, that's what they're drawing upon.
Yeah.
But to describe some of these as the most disturbing examples, when they may well be a technical misalignment with what Erskine May says, to then pretend that this is perhaps an egregious attack on democracy, I think a lot of people will question that and question how introspective this committee is being.
Yeah, this committee is ridiculous. It suspended Boris Johnson for 90 days from the Commons, even though he'd already resigned as an MP. 50 days of it because he had the temerity to criticise the way the committee worked. Pompous and ridiculous.
We need to move on. You will be back to tell us about the Rwanda ruling.
Yes.
Do not go anywhere.
That
is
just
huge
after 10
news
o'clock,
today.
I think.
Now, also, Madonna has postponed her world tour after falling ill and staying several days in intensive care.
Now, this is a world tour to mark her 40 years in show business. Her management say that she developed a serious bacterial infection, but is recovering after spending some time in intensive care.
So joining us for more is showbiz reporter Stephanie Tecci. Good morning, Stephanie. Good morning.
Good morning, Andrew and Bev.
Thank you for joining us. So give us the background to this, because none of us knew that she was in hospital. How did we eventually find out?
So this has very much been kept under wraps. It was Madonna's long-term manager, Guy Oseary, who put a statement out on his Instagram last night to say that her forthcoming world tour celebration will be postponed due to the singer being found unresponsive, and she was moved to be intubated over the weekend in New York. He said she's set to make a full recovery, but this has had a knock-on effect on her tour. So she was due to start her tour in Vancouver next month on July 15th. So this will come as a big blow to Madonna, because she may be 64, but Madonna's very much young at heart, and nothing gets her going than her tours. So to have this postponed is definitely not going to be something she'll be too happy about, but her health comes first, and by the sounds of it, she must have been in a serious state.
Yeah, and there's some suggestion from the family, Stephanie, that they could have lost her.
Yeah, a lot. Her daughter Lourdes has been by her side since she was taken to hospital in New York. Other family members have been given interviews saying that they really felt like it was touch and go, and they haven't seen her in such a condition. This isn't the first time that Madonna has suffered injuries or been sick ahead of a world tour. In 2019, when she was doing her Madam X tour, she was forced to postpone dates because of knee injuries, and she had to go for surgery. This was set to be an 84-date world tour across 12 countries. So for any artist or any singer, you're putting yourself under a lot of immense pressure to get your dancing right, your singing right. So that's a lot to take in your body, especially when you're older. And we know Madonna, she likes to give off this impression that she's young and she's fit. But when you're preparing for tours, they are quite taxing.
I guess we don't know. It's interesting, isn't it, that they released the detail that she had a severe infection, but obviously haven't told us anything about how she'd contracted that infection. I think the last post on her Instagram, Steph, was on June the 20th, so only 4 days before hospitalisation. And she said it was the calm before the storm as she prepared for the tour. I mean, she'll be devastated because also she was celebrating 40 years of one of the most famous songs, Holiday, which kind of launched her.
This was set to be a big moment for Madonna. You know, when it comes to her music, she's refused to give up to critics who have said she should wind down, she should act her age. Madonna's always wanted to be like, I can go on with my career, I can perform just as a 20-year-old can. So for her, this will definitely be a devastating blow. And also there's a big question, Andrew and Bev, whether this tour can still go ahead. I think a lot of people are downplaying a bacterial infection. They can be quite life-threatening. So depending on her state, this tour was supposed to go from July until January next year. So we don't know how much recovery time she's going to need and whether she will indeed proceed with this tour.
Fascinating.
OK, yeah, thank you, Stephanie. Well, luckily, she's all right. Biggest star in the world, biggest music star of my lifetime, no doubt about it.
I have to say, I saw her in Hyde Park a few years ago. She was very disappointing
was
she sang lots of songs we didn't know.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted the Material
classics.
Girl, Like a Virgin.
Yeah, True
And she sang
Blue.
lots of new songs. And I thought, that's not what we're here for.
Yeah.
People started trailing away before the end.
Oh, no.
Yeah, very disappointing.
Right, the royal family cost the taxpayer more than £86 million last year, official figures from Buckingham Palace have shown.
They spent about £1 million on helicopter journeys, but the overall travel expenditure was down by around 13%.
Yeah, so Cameron Walker is here with us now because Prince Charles's finances are in the headlines today. Cameron, why is that?
Yeah, well, the Sovereign Grant Report, which is the pot of money given by the government to the royal family to fund their official duties, has been released by Buckingham Palace. Lots and lots of details. But before we start that, let's just explain to viewers and listeners exactly how the royal family is funded. So we've got a graphic for those watching on television, which is going to show you what the Crown Estate is, and that is a big property portfolio of lands and buildings and the seabed around the United Kingdom, owned by the Crown. But the King surrenders all of those profits to the Treasury, and then the Treasury then pay a percentage of those profits back to the King, which is known as the Sovereign Grant. Usually 15%, but because Buckingham Palace is being resurfaced at the moment, it's 25% roughly, which is why £86.3 million of our money, taxpayers' money, has been spent on the royal family last year. There's lots of figures to delve into. You said in your link, £1 million spent on helicopters. King Charles, obviously, very environmentally conscious, so perhaps some critics would call him out on that one.
The Palace always like to come up with a figure, Cameron, don't they? It costs per family or per taxpayer £1.29 a year. It's still pretty small beer, but that doesn't take into account, of course, the huge cost of security, which we never ever get the real figure of.
Yeah, exactly. And security is done separately by the Home Office, so this is not included within the sovereign grant. But what is little funny details, really, like Buckingham Palace's temperature being turned down to 19 degrees in the rooms which are occupied, but only 16 degrees in the rooms which are unoccupied due to the rising cost of heating bills. And, of course, Buckingham Palace, a massive building to heat. But staff salary costs have gone up quite substantially, 5 or 6%, which has massively increased the payroll for Buckingham Palace, £27.1 million. As for diversity, though, the Buckingham Palace has missed their diversity target for a second year running. I think it's roughly 9% or something. And compared to Kensington Palace, which is William and Catherine's household, their diversity figure for ethnic minorities is 16.3%. So Kensington Palace doing better than Buckingham Palace on that one.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, we're not. None of us are going to feel too devastated for the King, are we? That his property portfolio apparently shrunk in value by 500 million, and it's still billions and billions. I mean, he's on paper. Crown Estate is enormously wealthy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the Crown Estate profits for this year have been published, £442 million.
A lot of money.
But that's because of the windfall created from these 6 offshore wind farms which were invested in. But that windfall of 100 million, the King, from my understanding, does not want to go into the sovereign grant. He doesn't want that to be part of it. He wants it to go back into the public purse for the wider public good. He doesn't want to benefit directly from that extra windfall money.
Well, that seems sensible, doesn't it?
Yeah. And we're going to see much of them in the next few days? Where are they? What are the royals up to?
The King, well, I think you'll have to wait and see. There's a few things which perhaps we can't say just yet. But next week, of course, the King's going to be in Scotland for Edinburgh, Holyrood Week. And we're going to have the ceremony, the presentation of the Scottish crown jewels to King Charles as the new sovereign. It's been dubbed as a kind of mini coronation. I don't think Buckingham Palace see it as that way, but still a pretty significant event.
They did a mini coronation, Scottish coronation for the Queen. And I remember there was some surprise when she went up to Scotland. She was dressed in like a civvies, if you could use that. They were expected her to be in robes and crowns and coronets. So it was a little bit disappointing. So they'll be quite aware of that when he does this in Scotland next week.
Absolutely, and there's going to be a huge procession from Edinburgh Castle with the Scottish crown jewels down to St Giles Cathedral, and a separate procession from Palace of Holyrood in Edinburgh with members of the royal family processing to St Giles Cathedral. So it is going to be very similar looking.
Will they
to
all
what
be
we saw
out
in
there?
London.
Will they all be on parade? All the senior royals?
We know for sure King, Queen, Prince and Princess of Wales, but we don't know about any of the others yet.
I bet the Princess Anne will be there because she does a lot in Scotland.
Well, perhaps. I'm sure we'll see others popping up from time to time.
Yeah.
You've been hanging out with Prince William quite a lot recently, haven't you? I mean,
yeah.
In a professional capacity. But I thought his homelessness charity launch ambition project went very, very well. It was beautifully executed, wasn't it? Yeah. All the messaging was good. He looked great. The only thing that was a bit odd is he had Jerry Halliwell with him one day. I couldn't quite understand that.
Yeah, who's got...
So she's one of the Homewards advocates. Yeah. So he's got a load of celebrities.
Lives on about 5 estates.
Yeah.
Boating lakes.
But he's doing brilliantly, isn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think he really got the messaging perhaps right from a lot of commentators and what they're saying, because even though there was a lot of criticism, the fact that he has 3 properties himself, 135,000 acres with the Duchy of Cornwall, from my understanding, he clearly is very aware of his privilege, and a lot of people were picking up on that. And what he's doing is using his platform, his fame, to shine a light on an issue which, let's be honest, would not be on the front pages of the papers, and we wouldn't be talking about homelessness if it wasn't for him.
He's a great enabler. But there is that issue. Kensington Palace, empty, used to be his home, 21 rooms.
Yeah, 21 rooms for apartment 1A. And interestingly, what we found out in the Sovereign Grants report today is the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester's former home, apartment 1, which is another 21-room property within Kensington Palace, is sat empty and unfit for habitation because there's no money to spend on its refit. But also, who would live in it even if they did refit it?
And of course, don't forget, Buckingham Palace, 750 rooms, no one's living there either.
No, yet, although the royal aides insist that the King and
He's
Queen
not
will
going
one
there
day live there.
anytime soon. It's a bit shabby inside, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I have had the privilege of being inside on a few occasions, and there's a very clear difference between the public staterooms and what we see behind the scenes. But obviously, it's still going through a refurbishment.
But you know, the super posh often live quite shabby.
Yeah.
The super posh, super rich often have a very shabby look about their house.
Yeah, they had some. I remember we saw when the Mirror got in, when he was the royal butler a few years ago, and we saw some of the furniture. 1970s stuff, and it was so naff, but rather endearing.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Queen, of course, with her Tupperware.
Yeah.
Which made her love us even more.
Down with the people.
Yeah.
Thank you, Cameron. Right, still to come, we're going to have the very latest as the Court of Appeal rules on the government's Rwanda policy challenge. Stay tuned. This is Britain's Newsroom on GBNews, the People's Channel. First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 29th of June. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
And any moment now, it's a big moment. We're set to receive the latest ruling of appeal on whether the government's Rwanda policy, shipping those illegal refugees to Rwanda, is legal.
Yeah, huge story that. And also 1 week on from news of the catastrophic implosion on board the Titan submersible, the US Coast Guard has begun to salvage the wreckage, including what they're calling presumed human remains. We'll have all the details.
And the latest finances for the King have been released, revealing the monarch, my word, he's facing the same inflation pains as the rest of us, but I suspect he's not keeping him awake at night. Inflation has, of course, put pressure on his own expenditure.
We're also going to be talking to Britain's greatest ever Olympian, Sir Steve Redgrave. He's down at Henley Regatta and he's part of a campaign about the state of Britain's rivers on the day that obviously Thames water may be about to collapse. Looking forward to talking to him about that.
Extraordinary. He won a gold at 5 consecutive Olympics. Quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
now, the Court of Appeal is going to rule at any moment now whether the government's plan to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda is lawful. The House of Lords, I can tell you, only yesterday was doing its very best to wreck the legislation.
Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is live for us now at the Royal Courts of Justice. Good morning, Mark. What sort of timings are we looking at for this?
Well, any second now we're expecting these 3 senior judges, including the Lord Chief Justice, Lord Burnett, to deliver their ruling. Lord Burnett, we believe, will hand down that ruling in what will be a summarised judgment. And it is an appeal by a human rights charity and by a group of asylum seekers against the government's Rwanda policy. As I say, we're expecting any second now for Lord Burnett to begin delivering that ruling. And the government, of course, will be hanging on his every word to determine whether they can push forward with that policy of sending those asylum seekers off on a one-way journey to Rwanda to be processed there. But it's unlikely still to be the end of the road, however this ruling decides.
We're actually going into the court right now. We can't hear him, but we're going to bring you some volume from the High Court, the Appeal Court.
Individual appellants are from Syria, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, Sudan, and Albania. They arrived in the United Kingdom irregularly by crossing the English Channel from France in small boats. In the cases of each of the appellants, the government made a decision in late May or early June 2022 not to consider their asylum claims, but to remove them to Rwanda, where their claims would be decided under the Rwandan asylum system. Those decisions were made in accordance with arrangements between the two governments announced on the 14th of April 2022 and contained in a memorandum of understanding and a number of diplomatic notes verbal. They comprised the Rwanda Agreement. On the basis of the assurances from the Rwandan government contained in the terms of the Rwanda Agreement, its term in place and other inquiries carried out by the United Kingdom government, Rwanda was treated as a safe third country under the relevant provisions of the immigration rules. This is the Rwanda policy. The appellants and other claimants brought proceedings in the High Court challenging both the lawfulness of the Rwanda policy generally, referred to as the generic challenge, and the government's decisions specifically to remove each of them to Rwanda. Removals did not go ahead pending the outcome of these proceedings. The central issue before the High Court and before us was whether the asylum system in Rwanda was capable of delivering reliable outcomes. The appellant's case is that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that any person sent to Rwanda will be removed to their home country when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. Sending them to Rwanda in those circumstances would breach Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights. In that sense, the appellants submitted that Rwanda is not a safe third country. The High Court, Lord Justice Lewis and Mr. Justice Swift, heard those challenges in September and October 2022. Its decision was handed down on the 19th of December 2022. In the case of the individual claimants, the decisions to remove them were quashed on the basis of procedural unfairness in their particular cases. But the court dismissed the generic challenges to the Rwanda policy. The appeals to this court are against the High Court's decision on the generic challenges. The government has not appealed against the quashing of the decisions in the appellant's individual cases and has not yet made any fresh decisions in those or other cases pending the outcome of the appeals. The appeals were argued before us over 4 days between the 24th and the 27th of April 2023. The grounds were numerous and included other legal issues besides the question whether Rwanda was a safe third country in the sense we have described. The court had to consider a great deal of detailed evidence as well as other materials. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees was permitted to make submissions as an interested party, and evidence filed on behalf of the UNHCR formed the foundation of much of the appellant's case. By a majority, this court allows the appeal on the issue of whether Rwanda is a safe third country. It unanimously dismisses the other grounds. There is a subsidiary question about whether there are substantial grounds for believing that persons sent to Rwanda will face a real risk of treatment contrary to Article 3 in Rwanda itself. Although we do not all take the same view on that subsidiary question, the decision of the High Court is undisturbed on that point. I will now give a very brief summary of the Court of Appeal's reasons. To understand the detail, it is necessary to read the judgments, which will be made available in court and online as soon as I have delivered this summary. The decision of the majority, the Master of the Rolls, Sir Geoffrey Voss, and Lord Justice Underhill, the Vice President of the Court of Appeal's Civil Division, is that the deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country. That conclusion is founded on the evidence which was before the High Court that Rwanda's system for deciding asylum claims was, in the period up to the conclusion of the Rwanda Agreement, inadequate. The Court is unanimous in accepting that the assurances given by the Rwandan government were made in good faith and were intended to address any defects in the asylum process. However, the majority believes that the evidence does not establish that the necessary changes had by then been reliably effected, or would have been at the time of the proposed removals. In consequence, sending anyone to Rwanda would constitute a breach of Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which Parliament has required the government to comply with. In agreement with the High Court, I have reached the opposite conclusion. I agree that the procedures put in place under the Rwandan Agreement and the assurances given by the Rwandan government are sufficient to ensure that there is no real risk that asylum seekers relocated under the Rwandan policy will be wrongly returned to countries where they face persecution or other inhumane treatment. I have concluded that the chances of failed asylum seekers being returned to their countries of origin are in any event low, not least because Rwanda has no agreements in place with any of the countries in question. In addition, extensive monitoring arrangements, formal and informal, of all those sent to Rwanda and of their asylum claims once there, provide powerful protection. I take the view that the arrangements put in place provide sufficient safeguards in a context where both governments will be determined to make the agreement work and be seen to do so. As for the grounds on which the appellants have been unsuccessful, I can summarise our reasoning as follows. 1. The effect of the Refugee Convention. Article 31 of the Refugee Convention does not, in principle, prevent the United Kingdom from removing asylum seekers to a safe third country. 2. Retained EU law. EU law only permits asylum seekers to be removed to a safe third country if they have some connection to that country. None of the appellants has any connection to Rwanda. However, the Court holds that that requirement has ceased to be part of United Kingdom law as a result of the provisions of the Immigration and Social Security Cooperation EU Withdrawal Act 2020, which is part of the legislation dealing with the consequences of the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. 3. Designation as a safe third country. Schedule 3 to the Asylum and Immigration Treatment of Claimants Act 2004 allows the government, as long as it obtains parliamentary approval, to designate particular countries as safe. The government did not in these cases make use of those procedures. Instead, it proceeded by giving guidance to caseworkers for application in individual decision. The Court holds that it was not unlawful for it to proceed in that way. 4. Data protection. Decisions to remove individuals to Rwanda are not themselves invalidated by any breaches of the data protection legislation which it is alleged would or might occur in the course or in consequence of their removal. 5. Fairness of procedures. Asylum Aid submitted that the procedures by which the government decided whether to relocate individual asylum seekers to Rwanda were inherently unfair, in particular because of the short timetable applying to representations seeking to resist removal. The court rejects that submission, but it holds that some aspects of the High Court's reasoning cannot be supported, and that the government needs to give guidance to caseworkers emphasising the importance of flexibility in granting extensions to the time limits where fairness requires. The result is that the High Court's decision that Rwanda was a safe third country is reversed, and that unless and until the deficiencies in its asylum processes are corrected, removal of asylum seekers to Rwanda will be unlawful. Finally, I should make clear that our decision implies no view whatever about the political merits or otherwise of the Rwanda policy. Those are entirely a matter for the government, on which the court has nothing to say. Our concern is only whether the policy complies with the law as laid down by Parliament.
OK, well, that's Lord Burnett of Malden. He is the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, delivering his verdict that it appears the Rwanda policy, big blow for the government, is unlawful. We're going to go straight to Mark White, our Home and Security Editor, who is at the Royal Courts of Justice. Mark.
Well, this is no doubt a very significant blow for the government. It, in effect, reverses that decision made by the High Court in December of last year, saying that the government's policy to send asylum seekers off to Rwanda for processing was lawful. The judges handing down their ruling now saying that they believe the deficiencies within the Rwandan asylum system mean that that is not a safe third country to send asylum seekers to. And it says, and you heard Lord Burnett, the Lord Chief Justice, right at the end, saying unless and until the Rwandan government addresses those deficiencies within its asylum system, then any move by the UK government to send asylum seekers to that East African country would be unlawful. So a very big blow for Rishi Sunak and his policy of stopping the boats. Suella Braverman, of course, as well, has been in Rwanda to see just what the Rwandan government was doing to accommodate those asylum seekers that the government still hopes to send there at some point. Now let's just see what the government does. I think it's almost certain that the government will try to appeal this decision by the Court of Appeal. It may then be an appeal to the Supreme Court. Perhaps in league with the Rwandan government, they look as a matter of urgency to address these deficiencies that have been highlighted by the Court of Appeal here before moving to any kind of appeal at the Supreme Court. It's all up in the air. As I say, this is a very significant defeat for the government, who were on course following that High Court ruling to have this policy agreed as lawful, and at some point, although they wanted to expend all of the legal proceedings, and that would have entailed, no matter how this went today, probably an appeal to the Supreme Court, and perhaps unlikely that the first flights would take off until much later this year, if not early next year anyway. But now it's all up in the air, and I don't mean the flights to Rwanda. The government is going to have a rethink, decide what it's doing, and we expect to hear from the government in the minutes ahead. As soon as we do, we'll bring that to you.
Mark, do we know what the deficiencies that the appeal court judges have identified in Rwanda's asylum system? What are these deficiencies?
Yeah, we're reading through this long and complex judgment now to try to determine exactly what these deficiencies are. This was just a summary judgment that was read out, so really just highlighting the fact that they believe that the asylum system and the processes in place in asylum, in the Rwandan asylum system, are not robust enough to ensure that anyone sent to Rwanda would be properly safeguarded, and therefore anyone going to that country would clearly be in breach, the Lord Chief Justice said, of their human rights under the UN Convention on Human Rights. So a bitter blow for the government. Clearly, those asylum seekers and the charities that have been backing them will be celebrating today. They will feel that it absolutely, from their point of view, cements the idea that they had put forward, that the government of Rwanda did not provide a safe environment for asylum seekers to be sent to that East African country, precisely because of the deficiencies. As I say, we're looking at what is a complex judgment. We'll try to bring you a bit more detail on what those deficiencies might be. But suffice to say, Rwanda, according to the Court of Appeal, is not a safe country to send asylum seekers from the UK to.
OK, thank you so much, Mark White there. We're going to talk now to one of those people who might be celebrating, Steve Valdez-Simmons from Amnesty International. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning.
Good morning. I suppose to you this means common sense has triumphed.
Well, I hope so, but of course the government may yet seek permission to appeal to the Supreme Court, and this may trundle on for some considerable time, or the government may go back to the Rwandan government and try and see what can be done to address whatever are the particular deficiencies that have concerned the Court of Appeal. Amnesty's position is quite clear. This country, like every other, has obligations to people who seek asylum. Rwanda already hosts more refugees than do we. We should take our responsibilities just as we expect others to do so, including poorer and less stable, and I'm sorry to say, less safe countries such as Rwanda.
There's great scepticism, though, Steve, as you know, as to how many of those young men coming across the Channel are asylum seekers, predominantly young men in their 30s. There is the strong suspicion many of them are economic migrants.
Well, all we can do is look at the data that the Home Office collects and presents and the effect of the decisions that it makes, having considered the claims when and if it does so. And all of that data demonstrates that the great majority of people who have crossed the Channel over recent years have been refugees. They've nearly all been people seeking asylum. As to whether they've been entitled to it, the evidence shows the great majority are.
So what is the solution for you then, Steve? I mean, do you have a number in mind of refugees that you feel we should take every year?
No, what Amnesty has in mind is what the Refugee Convention requires of all states, and what this country seems to require still of the French and the Italians, let alone the Rwandans and everybody else, is that the people who make claims for asylum in your country ought to have those claims determined, and if they are refugees, be permitted to stay. And if we did that, not only would our asylum system work much more cost effectively, actually we'd still end up receiving far fewer refugees than most of our European neighbours, let alone countries elsewhere.
But Steve, a lot of people, again, will say, hang on, they're in France, a safe country, they've been in France for some time. If they're genuinely fleeing asylum, why don't they stay in France, a peaceful country, a civilised country? It fuels the suspicion they're coming to Britain because they think they're going to have a better life here. It's nothing to do with asylum.
I'm really sorry to say this, it's rather an easy and comfortable position, isn't it, for people in the UK to take when France already receives so many more people into its system and protects so many more refugees than do we. People who come here include people who have family and connections here, not in France. Why on earth should they not make their asylum claims where they will be safe with their family and connections? So why don't we just pull up our sleeves and get on with the job of taking the rather limited, by comparison, responsibilities that are ever asked of us.
I'm sure you would agree with us, though, that nobody wants thousands of people getting on those boats to come across the channel every day. In the summer, we're going to see dozens and dozens per day. You don't want that. We don't want that. So what is the solution?
Well, there's an easy solution to that, one that has once, over the last just over 20 years, been applied by a British government with the French government. And that is for this country to say to the French, some of the people on your territory, we can receive into our system and help share some responsibility with you. And a very good place to start would be identifying the people who do have connections here and providing routes for them into our system rather than them relying on smugglers.
OK.
Steve Valdez-Simmons from Amnesty International. Of course, Steve makes the point that France takes many more refugees. France, in landmass, is 3 times the size of Britain, and it has the same population, if not even a smaller population. So I think we're doing more than our fair share.
I think so.
We're going to go back to the High Court because this is a seismic moment, because the Rwanda policy has been ruled unlawful by the Court of Appeal. The High Court said it was legal, lawful. The Court of Appeal said it isn't. Mark White is our Home and Security Editor who's at the High Court. Mark, we've just been talking to Amnesty International who say, well, you know, we've just got to take more refugees.
Well, yes, and I think many people in this country would certainly disagree with that particular viewpoint. But, of course, any move to send people claiming asylum in this country to a third country has to be lawful. And at the end of the day, the government wants to follow the rule of law. And on this occasion, the Court of Appeal has ruled that that policy is unlawful. Now, interestingly, it's worth pointing out there were 3 appeal court judges handing down this decision today. Lord Burnett, the Lord Chief Justice, was a man who we heard reading out that judgment. And we should say as well that he disagreed with the other 2 judges. That was the Master of the Rolls and Lord Justice Underhill, who decided that the policy of the government was unlawful, but the Lord Chief Justice, and we heard him as he was reading out the judgment, said that he believed the risk to asylum seekers of being sent to Rwanda and being effectively sent back to that country as a current country of origin, the risks of this were low. He actually sided with the High Court decision that was made back in December of last year that the government's policy was lawful. But it is 3 appeal court judges, the majority rules, and those 2 other appeal court judges have ruled that this is a policy that is unlawful. So now we await the reaction from the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who has, of course, said throughout that the Rwanda policy is a crucial element to his plans to stop the boats. It's not all, of course, hinging on Rwanda. The government has always argued that Rwanda is not a silver bullet in and of itself, that there are other aspects that will ultimately, they believe, stop the boats, such as a greater cooperation with France, and that of course includes, controversially, many millions of pounds of extra UK taxpayers' money going to France to help them fight and tackle the people smugglers on that side of the channel.
OK, thank you very much, Mark. Mark White there. Huge news that the Rwanda policy ruled unlawful at the High Court. We will no doubt get responses from politicians this afternoon. Yeah. We're going to be also discussing in this show, still a lot to pack in this morning, Nicola Sturgeon's appearance at the COVID inquiry. We'll have that with Neil Oliver. We've also got Sir Steve Redgrave, who's going to be here to talk about the state of Britain's rivers. Don't go anywhere.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m. Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And
it's 10:30 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, still to come this morning, we're going to have the latest on the Rwanda ruling. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. We're going to get to some of those. We're also going to be talking to Neil Oliver about Nicola Sturgeon at the COVID inquiry. But first of all, your morning's news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's just gone 10:30. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. And we start with that breaking news that the Court of Appeal has ruled the government policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda unlawful. 3 judges overturned a High Court ruling that previously said the East African nation could be considered a safe third country. It follows calls from individual asylum seekers and charity Asylum Aid to challenge the decision. Presiding Judge Lord Burnett said asylum seekers were at risk of inhumane treatment.
Deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country.
Boris Johnson's allies have been criticised by the Privileges Committee for what it describes as undermining the House of Commons procedures. They include Nadine Dorries, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. The Privileges Committee report 2 weeks ago found the former Prime Minister had repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID breaches in Number 10. And households are being advised to submit meter readings to their energy suppliers before Saturday. It's ahead of Ofgem's lowered price cap following falling wholesale prices, which comes into effect on July the 1st. The average household energy bill will fall by £426 a year from next month. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2643 and €1.1586. The price of gold is £1,507.59 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,491 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Good morning, welcome back. It is 10:33. This is Britain's Newsroom. You have been getting in touch this morning. People are incensed about Rwanda.
Of course they are, because if you're just tuning in, the Court of Appeal has ruled the policy of shipping people to Rwanda is unlawful. It was a split decision. 2 judges said unlawful, 1 said it was lawful. We expect the government will appeal, but we haven't heard anything from the government yet. But it's a huge blow, and the government's entire migration policy now is a shambles.
That's right, and obviously...
Well, it's a shambles anyway.
It's based on the idea that the ruling was on the fact that they couldn't guarantee the safety of asylum seekers in Rwanda. They didn't feel they had assurances from the Rwandan government. So, as Mark White explained, it may be that our government go back to theirs to say, can you sort this out?
Yeah, but it's ironic, isn't it? So they'll continue to cross the channel, which is not safe, could kill them, but the Court of Appeal decided that Rwanda is even less safe.
So Gary has said the only option now legally is to turn the boats back in the channel.
Another Gary here says we may as well not bother with border control anymore. An absolutely disgraceful decision. Peter says, so the taxpayers had to pay for decisions against this interest. The decision now means the so-called safe countries are obliged to take any refugees from anywhere. So the 100 million of displaced cannot be rejected.
Michael, Dave has actually said absolutely brilliant news coming out of the Court of Appeal. That seems to be an exception. Michael has said, let's hope this is another nail in the coffin of this ridiculous policy. No, another one in support of it. And he says the Royal Court of Justice just made £170 million plus spent on Rwanda. A waste of money. What's the point of a government that can be overruled by the courts? Typical. Spend taxpayers' money, then see if it's legal or not.
And to be fair to the government, of course, the High Court did say it was legal, and now the Court of Appeal said it hasn't. We can now talk to immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal, who joins us now. Harjap, morning to you. What's your reasoning here? A split decision, but it's a decision nevertheless that it's an unlawful policy. Do you agree?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to look at what the court said. So the last court, we know the High Court agreed that it was lawful. Now there's been a split decision where the judges were split, and some saying that actually the government were right, it's lawful, but the majority saying no, it needs to be rehashed in it. And we've got to remember, they're saying in its current form. So that means the government haven't played this right. They haven't got the right legal advice. They did the policy first and then thought, well, let's try and push it to see if it's legal or not. Really, it's almost like a blag or a bluff. They thought, you know what, we're going to try and blag our way through this, and we're going to see if it's legal or not, as opposed to proper, preparation, run it past their own lawyers first, run it past some judges first. Will this hold or not? If it doesn't hold, then we go back to the drawing board and prepare a new policy. So now we're probably expecting this afternoon for Suella Braverman to announce that she's going to appeal this. It's going to go further. I don't expect any flights to take off this year. Might not even get up and running at all, the scheme. So once again, it's a big, big loss for the government and just shows what a shamble it is.
And so if they appeal, which we expect they will, Harjap, they then appeal to the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land.
Right.
Even then, if the government were to win it, the appeal, there could then be an appeal to the European Court.
Yeah, I mean, at this stage, the European Court hasn't even got involved. So we can't even get it past our own judges, the English judges. That's how badly prepared this whole scheme has been. Surely when you prepare something, you know, intelligent people and learned people know, when you prepare an essay, a thesis, or anything, you run it past people first to see before submitting it. This has been the opposite. This has been like, you know what, we'll promise the people something. Oh no, guess what, we might be in trouble. This, just what we're trying to do might be illegal. And in fact, it's been ruled that today. So they'll have to go back to the drawing board, try and think of something else. And in the meantime, appeal it and hope that they're going to win the appeal. And most importantly, they've got an election. I don't think we're going to get all of this sorted before an election. And I think they're going to be told at a ballot box that, you know, you can't just make promises to the public and then just not deliver.
This is a big problem for the Prime Minister personally, Harjap, because he's made these 5 pledges. One of them is to halve inflation. One of them is to stop the boats. Sending them to Rwanda, refugees to Rwanda, was the key way to stop the boats. So that's sunk along with his inflation pledge.
Yeah, I mean, it's never a good idea to try and send people to a country where there's been a genocide before in recent years. I mean, Rwanda was a country where 1 million people were slaughtering each other in about 2 weeks. There were 2 tribes literally butchering each other, families, women and children.
That was a long time ago, though, Harjap. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, but it's not. But it was in our lifetime. And it was something that, you know, I was grown up when it happened, and I assume you were as well.
But in a way, I admire the ambition of the British government to help that country, in a sense.
Yeah.
I admire, you know, Suella Braverman's been working very hard to explain that it's a big tech hub, Rwanda. You know, it's got one of the biggest tech hubs in the world, funded by the World Economic Forum. Like, they're trying to invest in that country. And what do they need? They need young people to work in that economy, because obviously, because of the genocide, they don't have enough of a younger demographic. On paper, I can, even though it comes with that stigma, on paper, I can see the logic behind wanting to have that cooperation. Of course, it's easy to forget that this was under Priti Patel, actually, rather than Suella Braverman. This was a Priti Patel endeavour, wasn't it? Would you expect her to come out and say something today, Harjap?
No, she doesn't have to. I think Suella Braverman's carrying the can for this because she is a lawyer. Suella Braverman was in one of the top positions, legal positions in this country before she became Home Secretary. She should have known whether this was legal or not. So this is on her. Priti Patel wasn't a lawyer. You know, she can put her hands up and say, well, hold on, I'm not a lawyer, but the person who came after me, she's been at this, you know, in the legal field for 20-odd years. She should have known better, should have consulted her colleagues. Suella Braverman's been up in front of these judges, probably, during cases. So she would have known these people, and she would have seen cases like this day in, day out. And if she hadn't, then she should have consulted people who did have that knowledge. So once again, this is on the government and the Home Secretary trying to push through something that's potentially, or today has been ruled illegal. And I don't think it's come from a sense of helping other countries. Surely the whole priority here is to help this country first and to read the sentiment of the people. I mean, the messages that you're getting in is all about the sentiments of the British people, and this government should be prioritising British people. If the government's going to say, well, hold on, we're not really concerned with the British people, but we've got to help a country in Africa.
Well, it's both, isn't it? It's both.
Yeah, it's that shouldn't be the priority. The priority has always been to stop the small boats, and now they're going to have to deliver on that and maybe think of other ways to stop the small boats. Like we've always said on this, I've been on GBNews for a year saying this, often with different presenters and yourselves. Go after the gangs. If there's no gangs, then people won't be able to use it. You don't stop drug dealing by locking up drug users. You stop it by catching the drug dealers. You don't stop people smuggling and trafficking by locking up the people being trafficked.
We forget that too easily.
The people who are doing the trafficking.
Harjap, thank you. Harjap Singh Bangal, immigration lawyer there. It's so easy to forget that piece of the puzzle, isn't it?
And we remember just recently we were reading that the gangs were advertising their services on flipping TikTok.
Yeah.
How?
And travel
haven't been
agents down the
arrested.
streets. Was it in Turkey? Just travel agents. Pop in, give us your cash, and we'll stick you in a dinghy. Right, well, that will keep going, and keep your views on that coming, won't you? Now, the government is drawing up plans which could result in the renationalisation of the UK, of the country's largest water supplier. It's teetering on the brink of collapse. So joining us now is Liam Halligan.
It's Thames Water, Liam. What a mess.
It is a mess. Let's just rewind a little bit and think back to where we started with this company. I've got a little graphic here. Seeing as it's you, Bev. Seeing as it's you. Nice green dress, by the way.
Thanks.
So it was back in 1989 that Thames Water was privatised during those Thatcher-era privatisations. And this is the biggest water company in Britain. It's not just big chunks of London. It goes right across to parts of Gloucestershire to the west, all the way down to Kent in the east. It covers more than 1 in 4 of the British population, 27% of all households. Now, interestingly, since it's been privatised, its shares have been bought up by various strategic investors, including governments. So the government of the United Arab Emirates, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, owns part of Thames Water, as does the Chinese government.
Because they presumably assume it's going to be a profitable venture and they're going to get a good return.
That's right. But the problem it has a £14 billion debt pile that it's amassed over many years. Now, the problem is, when interest rates go up, the cost of servicing your debt goes up. And when inflation goes up, when a lot of the debt is linked to inflation, which it is, about half this debt pile is linked to inflation, again, the debt service goes up. And the problem is, it isn't that Thames Water hasn't got assets. It isn't that it hasn't got a big revenue stream. It has, because we're all paying our bills. Because bills are going up. They just went up last month.
Profits.
The problem they've got is a cash crunch. With all these debt service costs going up, they haven't got the operating capital to keep going. And they say they need an immediate cash injection of at least £1 billion. Now, this gives the government a dilemma. Some people say, the government should immediately renationalise Thames Water, make some kind of big ideological statement. We're taking it back in-house. But actually, under the terms of that 1989 Act of Privatisation, the government can put this company in special measures, and it can compel the owners of the company, the shareholders of the company, to pay money to service the debt and even swap the debt that they owe for equity. That means they make them own more of the company in order to pay off some of the debt.
I mean, that sounds quite complicated.
And it will be complicated, and there'll be lots and lots of lawyers involved, a lawyer's bonanza, and it could take a long time. That's why we're at a crunch point. So many of these big financial issues are decided, lock yourselves in a room because, the barbarians at the gate, the wolves are coming. The debt is owned by investors in the market. The value of that debt is now plunging. People are assuming they're not going to get the money back. So that makes all the sums much, much more difficult.
Some of the big shareholders, of course, have been paid billions of pounds.
So there was a previous shareholder, and they're not accused of any wrongdoing whatsoever, but we're talking about the Australian investment bank, Macquarie. They took out, over the decade or so that they owned a big chunk of Thames Water, they took about £1.6 billion in dividends. So that's £1,600 million in dividends.
We don't know between how many people that was shared.
We don't know between how many people, but it would have been pension funds. It's not just the executives. Of course, the executives will have had a lot of the action that have been incentivised, as the phrase has it. A lot of it will have been pension funds, insurance companies, big institutional shareholders. Individuals didn't pay themselves £1.6 billion, but it was a lot of money to take out the company. And there are other things going on in the background. So Thames Water, a lot of its infrastructure will go back to the Victorian era. A lot of it is leaking. You've got all those sewage leaks that we've been hearing about.
630 million litres a year.
Absolutely. Plus, these companies are under enormous pressure to do lots of sort of environmental and net zero stuff, which costs money up front. What's it going to mean for our bills? Well, none of this is going to help keep the bills low. All of this, almost everything I've said, is going to need more funding, either by shareholders and or the government and or almost certainly households paying their water bills.
No, it should be by the shareholders.
It should be by the shareholders, but it's going to be very difficult to force them to do that in the time frame that we need to do it.
How long
to make sure? Well, it depends on how complicated the loan covenants are. It depends how complicated the original legislation is. It's going to take a while. We're going to be talking about this for some time. So it's a story about our rising water bills, but also a big ideological battle in the Conservative Party and beyond.
We have to move on, Liam. It's never long enough, is it? Right. Moving on now. Former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon will appear before the COVID inquiry this morning, giving evidence on how prepared Scotland was for the pandemic.
We're going to speak to our very own GB News presenter Neil Oliver, who has quite strong views on Nicola Sturgeon, and he joins us now. Neil, morning. How well did she conduct herself during the COVID pandemic? We saw her on television every day, given free airtime by the BBC, I do recall.
Well, her handling was as disastrous as everybody else's handling of it. I mean, my broad interpretation of the whole handling of the pandemic, so-called, was that all of those who had a hand in it made it worse. You know, they either had no positive effect or they actually made things worse for the economy, for education, for people's futures, for health, the whole, across the board. You know, I'd love to know who's got the contract for the whitewash for the COVID inquiry, because that's a sweet deal. We know going into this that it's going to exonerate all of the guilty parties of any blame, and they will reassure one another that what they ought to have done was more of what they did, but earlier and harder. You know, we've already had submissions like that. You know, Hancock and the rest saying that their regret is that they didn't lock down earlier and that it wasn't, you know, harder, faster. They're clearly intent, apart from anything else, on maintaining that box of tricks that they had prepared for what's been happening to us for the last couple of years. And at the first opportunity, they'll bring that box of tricks out again for climate or whatever. When it comes to Nicola Sturgeon, disastrous. Look what happened in the care homes. Look what happened to, you know, the kids. I mean, my number one priority, I'm a dad of 3. You know, I watched what happened to my children going into it. You know, the nightmare of the closure of the schools, the long-term consequences of damage to their educations. We had farcical stuff from Sturgeon about, you know, cutting the bottom 6 inches off of classroom doors, and the kids sitting through winter with the windows open and their coats off. You know, for this farcical approach that was taken right across the piece. What we saw with Nicola Sturgeon was what Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP always and only do. It was an opportunity for them to try and position Scotland as though Scotland had already left the United Kingdom. All of Nicola Sturgeon's measures were just attempts to be doing something different than Boris Johnson and Westminster. If you say rule of 6, I'll say rule of 9. If you say for a fortnight, I'll say for 3 weeks. It was always and only just about trying to create this illusion, this pantomime, that Scotland was already a separate kingdom and that Nicola Sturgeon was its queen.
Yeah, well, no doubt she will continue to do a little bit more of that at the inquiry. I'm sorry it's so short, Neil. We've got such a packed show today. There's a huge amount going on, but great to see you.
She's being, as we speak, sworn in to speak at the inquiry.
Yeah,
so if she says anything interesting, that's a big if, of course. We'll bring it live.
Neil Oliver, of course, on GB News every Saturday night at 7.
And look who's in the studio. Karen Maloney's not being very noisy for a change.
I am, I've just dropped my microphone.
Of course, I knew you dropped something.
You look very well, though, Carol. Have you ever been on your holidays?
Lovely holiday.
Oh,
did a lot of sunbathing, did a lot of drinking wine and a lot of eating. Lots of food.
and a lot of complaining about EasyJet on your flight back.
I was complaining about
you were.
EasyJet. Shocking.
And political editor of
shocking EasyJet.
A political editor of The Express, Sam Lister, is also here, also looking fabulous, but not being on holiday.
We've got to ask first what you think about, but Sam, politically, they have to appeal, don't they, the government?
Absolutely, and I was told yesterday that they will appeal if it went against them, so it'll go to the Supreme Court.
They'll be encouraged, at least, that it was a split decision.
Very much so. I mean, actually, the fact that one of the judges has said it's safe, you know, that really does give them a bit of a ray of hope.
And the High Court said it was safe too.
Yeah.
What I don't get is, have they been to Rwanda then, these judges?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've actually been to Rwanda, Andrew, and it's beautiful, I have to say. But, I mean, I can't really tell you, like, on the ground, the safety, because we were taking the government,
but
so we're
you know
that
those appeal court judges have not been
to
Rwanda.
It. And I think a lot of people have a certain view of Rwanda back from the 80s.
That's right.
90s, from the 90s, rather.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the genocide was 30 years
Exactly.
ago. And, you know, one of your contributors there says it's not a good idea to send... You know,
it's a democracy now.
I'm sorry, that was 30 years ago. Things have changed. It's Rwanda's one of the fastest-growing economies in Africa, if not the world. It's the 29th most favoured place in the world to do business.
Yeah.
Why do they think it's not safe?
It's a great tech hub too now, isn't it?
It's a great... I mean, I heard Bev saying before about the tech hub, and yes, of course, they want new people there. I mean, they clearly haven't been, but I think, you know, the thing that really upsets me is that this is going to set the Stop the Boats campaign back 2 years. And the Tories haven't got 2 years. I think they're done for now, mainly because of this. And I just, you know, when you had Lord Burnett there saying that, you know, he thinks it's a safe country. It is a safe. It's a holiday destination, Rwanda. They're not sending people to torture them.
Well, you had a nice time there, didn't you, Sam?
Oh, it was beautiful. It really was. But I think what I was told yesterday was that I think they were anticipating there might be issues around gay rights, things like that, gay protection for gay asylum seekers. So the government is prepared to make slight tweaks to satisfy the courts that actually they are putting in protections for people.
It's funny how many of us suddenly will be gay asylum seekers now, isn't it? Suddenly, a lot of them, all those young men.
Yeah, but that's not what the ruling has gone against. They've just said it's generally not safe, which is outrageous. And you know, I don't know what we can do now. We just know how long this appeal has taken. So even if the government does launch an appeal, anyway, and the other thing, you can tell me this. Remember, you and Sam can tell me, because you're in Parliament. How did the government get it so wrong? They thought they were going to win this.
Well, they won because they won in the High Court, and then they lose in the Court of Appeal.
But they must have had the nod, maybe from Lord Burnett, that it's all going your way.
No, it doesn't work like that.
Does it?
But actually, I think in some... I've just been hitting the phones this morning to get the latest reaction from MPs, and actually, some MPs actually think, in a way, going to the Supreme Court, it just gives you that extra layer of this is actually nailed on, that there's no more...
If they win, that is.
If they win, But actually, they feel... I think they feel confident they will. But also, actually, in terms of timing, although it's not ideal because they were hoping to get the first flights off the ground by September, October... Actually, if you launch flights in January, February, and the number of people coming over on the boats is smaller, you can actually put that entire boatload of people onto a flight. And symbolically, that's quite a good deterrent. And obviously, the whole point of this policy is to deter people from coming over. If you do it in September when there's 1,000 people coming a day, then you can't do that. And so you kind of lose the impact of the deterrent.
The assumption is that the Supreme Court, if it goes to the Supreme Court, will act quickly. There's no indication that they will act quickly. They could take another 6 months. I mean,
this has gone on for weeks.
This is your front page of your paper today, isn't it, Sam? This is your byline on here, talking about Don't You Dare.
They weren't listening.
They weren't listening.
And this is the other aspect. This is Piers, the illegal migration bill.
Wrecking it last night.
That was back in the House of Lords last night. They inflicted 4 defeats. They were actually trying to inflict 6 defeats.
They were trying to kill the bill.
Yeah, they're trying to kill the bill. And the government's basically, they're going to have this showdown with them in the last week before recess, because they want to make it clear that actually we're the elected government. We're the people who represent the people.
Unelected peers do not decide government policy. But this is a fight the government can have and win.
Absolutely.
Because, of course, it will also expose Labour, because Labour absolutely fundamentally oppose this.
Well, it was the Labour and MPs, wasn't it, that put forward all the
amendments. And the so-called independent crossbenchers.
And it's Sam wrote in her column today, and this is absolutely right. You know, the Lords are totally out of touch with the people of this country. They are not affected by what is happening with the small boats crisis. It is the people in all the outlying towns and cities who are finding that their hotels are being taken over, that they're having lots of people wandering around the towns. You know, we heard this week there was a rape of a migrant a migrant raped a young woman who came here. I think the migrant was here for 40 days. And he showed his gratitude for being allowed into this country by raping a girl.
The split in the judges, was it the Lord Chief Justice actually backed the policy?
Yes,
Which is
he's
the most senior judge in England and Wales.
Which is encouraging, isn't it?
He backed the policy, but the 2 lesser judges didn't.
And he said, this is not about politics, this is only decided on the law, it's nothing to do with political motivations. But on policies like this, it's so, you know, obviously... These people are trained to be looking only at the law, not the politics. But it's very hard in these scenarios to ever be completely impartial and not dragged into the politics.
But politically, it's a huge mess again, isn't it?
It
We've
is.
got the inflation targets. He's struggling to hit that. Stop the boats is one of his 5 pledges. I'm going to stop the boats. You're not at the moment, Rishi.
And Rishi's whole thing is, I deliver. I'm a kind of managerial technocrat, safe pair of hands. I don't do all the drama and all the big promises. I just get on and deliver things. But actually, if you can't deliver on the small boats and you can't deliver on inflation...
It was always... Time is running out now. He does not have the time to push this through.
And Labour, and I'm afraid, Labour have no policy at all.
And you know, if you go online today, you know, you can see the comments from people. And people are just
enraged.
So frustrated. And they're saying, Rishi, can't you do something? Ignore the Lords, ignore the court. Now, we can't do that, but he has to do something.
Tony Abbott, the former Australian Prime Minister, made a speech in London only last week where he said, we just turned the boats back.
Yes, exactly.
That's what they did. And why can't we just turn the boats back? Still nobody's successfully explained that to why we can't.
No, and according to our maritime law, apparently we are allowed to do that in this country.
Why is the RNLI rescuing people, escorting them back? Why don't they take them back to France?
And it's interesting, when the Australians did that, their crossings went from huge. They cut them by more than 90%.
They did.
In a period of
Well, it was a disincentive, and that's what we need, isn't it?
I mean, that is the point. But I think the point you're saying about Labour, I mean, what is Labour's position on this? What are all the peers' position on this? What is the Archbishop, who has been so vocally against all this. I mean, what's his alternative? There is no alternative to this.
Why doesn't the Archbishop of Canterbury stick to his day job? Why doesn't he stick to his day job?
Very good question.
Collapsing church attendance, meddling and interfering.
Get him on a Zoom call, we'll ask him.
You know what happened to one Archbishop of Canterbury a long time ago? Thomas à Becket. I'm not suggesting that, but, you know, there was a time.
Right, we need to wrap up for now. In the next few moments, we're going to be speaking to one of Britain's most celebrated Olympians, Sir Steve Redgrave. He's going to join us from Henley Regatta to talk about the state of Britain's rivers. More on that in the next hour with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, it's 11 o'clock on Thursday, June the 29th. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very busy show today. Thank you for joining us. The Court of Appeal has ruled that the government policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. 2 of the 3 judges say the East African country is not safe. But what's the government going to do about it? Stay with us to find out.
Elsewhere, Scotland's former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, she's been sworn in. She's giving evidence to the COVID inquiry and how prepared Scotland was for the pandemic.
And 1 week on from the news of the catastrophic implosion on board the Titan submersible, The US Coast Guard has begun to salvage wreckage, including what they're telling us are human remains.
A big scoop. In the next few minutes, we're going to be speaking to Britain's most celebrated Olympian. In fact, he's the world's most celebrated Olympian. So Steve Redgrave, he's joining us from Henley Regatta, and he's going to talk about the state of our rivers.
That's right, but first of all, here is your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. And we start with some breaking news. Iraq's most senior counter-terrorism officer says British Islamic State terrorists are planning what's being described as a big attack on a public gathering in the UK. General Abdul Wahab el-Sadi told the Mirror newspaper his forces discovered the news just days ago after killing dozens of so-called ISIS militants in a desert hideout. And we'll bring you more on that story as we get it. And in other breaking news, the Court of Appeal has ruled the government policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. It follows calls from individual asylum seekers and the charity Asylum Aid to challenge a previous High Court ruling. 2 of the 3 judges today found the East African nation wasn't a safe country. The Rwandan government, though, says it's one of the safest in the world. Presiding Judge Lord Burnett says asylum seekers are at risk of inhumane treatment.
Deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country.
Boris Johnson's allies have been criticised by the Privileges Committee for what it describes as undermining the House of Commons procedures. They include Nadine Dorries, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. The Privileges Committee report 2 weeks ago found the former Prime Minister had repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID breaches in Number 10. The inquiry now says MPs should consider whether their actions could be a contempt of Parliament and what further action to take. Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Tang Demonaire, says the Prime Minister is too weak to deal with the issue.
We need to respect the fact the Privileges Committee have worked incredibly hard, and it just shows weak leadership from Rishi Sunak that he couldn't comment on the previous Privileges Committee report. I wonder if he's going to get round to commenting on this one. It's about time we had a strong leader. Under Rishi Sunak, all we've seen is weakness, someone who can't stand up to Boris Johnson on his dishonourable honours list, doesn't seem to be fixing the cost of living crisis anytime soon. I think what we really need is a general election.
Thames Water says it's working with shareholders to secure extra cash as ministers draw up contingency plans in the event of its collapse. The UK's biggest water supplier is battling to finance the £14 billion worth of debt following interest rate rises. Parliamentary Under-Secretary for Health, Neil O'Brien, says the government will step in if needed.
So, in the first instance, these are issues for these private companies to sort out. At the moment, it's speculation. And because they're private companies, it's for them and their shareholders to sort out any issues that they are facing. And I read in the papers this morning about various efforts that they are doing to do exactly that. Obviously, this is a heavily regulated industry and the government does have contingency plans. But in the first instance, these are private companies and they need to sort out any financing issues for themselves.
Scotland's former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and former Deputy First Minister John Swinney are giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. Mr Sturgeon is being questioned on how prepared Scotland was for the pandemic, as well as how she handled it. Jean Freeman, the former Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport, said yesterday there was no plan that could have helped the country cope with COVID-19. A police officer is being investigated for murder after fatally shooting a teen during a traffic stop in Paris. People took to the streets across France to protest against the killing, shooting fireworks at police and setting alight cars. 150 people have been arrested so far for rioting. Speaking at the start of a crisis meeting with senior ministers earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron called the violence unjustifiable. New sanctions have been introduced against Russia. The UK has blocked the country from accessing its legal advice. Kremlin-based individuals and businesses will no longer be able to get advice from UK lawyers. This includes everything from trade deals between global corporations to international money lending. Russia's highly dependent on the West for legal expertise, with the UK exporting £56 million in services to Russian businesses every year. And Virgin Galactic is preparing for its first commercial flight to the edge of space. A three-man crew from Italy will be on board the rocket plane called VSS Unity, along with an astronaut instructor. During the 90-minute flight, it will carry out 13 scientific research experiments. It's expected to launch from Spaceport America in New Mexico later. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back over to Andrew and Beth.
Well, it's a huge setback. The Court of Appeal has ruled the government's much-vaunted plan to deport illegal migrants around it is not lawful.
It's a devastating verdict for Rishi Sunak's pledge to stop migrants arriving by boat.
Our Home Security Editor, Mark White, is live for us now at the Royal Courts of Justice. Mark, I guess there will be some succour for the government in the fact it was a split verdict by the judges, and the Lord Chief Justice himself actually thought the policy was lawful.
Yeah, and I think because it was a split decision, the majority rules, of course, those two appeal court judges overruling, in a sense, the belief by the Lord Chief Justice that this was a lawful policy, but the fact it was a split decision make it inevitable, I think, that this is headed for the Supreme Court. But there's no doubt this has taken the government completely by surprise. The indications I was getting is that they were fairly confident that the appeal court judges would side with that original decision made by the High Court in December of last year. Well, for some instant reaction, we can speak to Natasha Zaparidis from the Freedom from Torture charity. Tell us, if you would, Natasha, your reaction, first of all, to just what the Court of Appeal has decided here today.
So today is a real victory for people seeking safety in this country, but it's also a victory for reason and compassion, because what the court has decided is that Rwanda is not a safe country and presents a real risk to individuals of a breach to Article 3, so a risk of a persecution or harm coming their way. So we're very pleased with the result today, because a number of organisations and parliamentarians and faith leaders and the UNHCR refugee body have all said for many months now that this is an immoral scheme and should never have happened, and that Rwanda was not safe.
But the appeal court here was not deciding this case on the moral imperative or other words, whatever. It was purely on law and whether, of course, Rwanda is a safe country. We heard the Lord Chief Justice there saying that actually he thinks the risk to asylum seekers sent to Rwanda, then being sent back to their home country, was very low.
Yes, but the bottom line is that, yes, you're absolutely right. Today was a legal judgment, and that judgment determined that Rwanda is not a safe country for people to be sent to. But nonetheless, alongside this, from our perspective as well, and the perspective of multiple people across the country, it is an immoral scheme, and it was a cash for humans deal that the government was trying to strike, and it has failed. And the government really needs to take a long, hard look at these types of proposals that they're putting forward and abandon their plans.
Just very briefly, though, are you prepared now for this going to the Supreme Court? That's the inevitable outcome here, isn't it?
Unfortunately, we do expect the government may well continue to be belligerent and push forward these inhumane policies. So we would not be surprised if they do take it to the Supreme Court. If they do, freedom from torture will continue to represent our clients in our therapy rooms, and we'll be standing in solidarity with people seeking safety and torture survivors against these sorts of immoral policies.
Okay, Natasha Sangarides, thank you very much indeed for joining us on GB News there. So that's the reaction from one of the charities, clearly, as you would expect, very pleased with that Court of Appeal decision today. But I think it's inevitable, it's headed now for the Supreme Court. As I say, the indications that I was getting is that the ministers were confident that the Court of Appeal would continue to rule that this was a lawful decision, this policy of sending people to Rwanda, that at the end of the day the safeguards in place, the monitoring mechanisms that would take place by the Rwandan government would be enough to ensure that people sent to Rwanda are safe.
OK, thank you, Mark. Joining us now for more on this is our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. Good morning, Tom. It's a huge blow for the government, isn't it?
It certainly is. And this was, I think, unexpected because, of course, the government had won previously on many of these claims. And this split decision, however, does create space for the government now. We haven't got formal indication of what they intend to do. We should get that early this afternoon. But I would be very surprised if the government did not take this to the Supreme Court and push it further. It's so totemic for what they're trying to do.
But if they then get defeated again, like maybe it's just time to go, all right, this isn't going to work, we've got to come up with a plan B.
They don't appear to have a plan B, though, Tom, do they?
There are some political commentators who would say that perhaps this plays into the government's hand. There are those in the government who would point to what they've been trying to do on the issues with the border, and perhaps there are also those who say that this Rwanda deterrent scheme might not actually be that deterring for some people, so it might not work. And what this allows the government to do, being in this perpetual state of suspended animation, is say, look, we're trying to stop the boats, but these lawyers, these activists, these charity groups, and indeed even the UN High Commissioner for Refugees being part of this case, what some might pejoratively term as the blob, are stopping the government enacting their preferred policy reached in agreement with the government of Rwanda. This could be something that is actually, in terms of a narrative for the Home Secretary, a political positive, even though obviously a policy failure.
That charity worker going on about stopping torture. Hello, are these people being tortured in France who are crossing the Channel? I mean, it's ridiculous.
This is one of the things that I always kind of sticks in my craw when we talk about this, is to what extent are these people, who are they? Like, are they genuinely families, mothers, children, fleeing from countries where they've been subjected to torture and imprisonment and risk with death? Or are they absolutely young men who just think, I can come to England because A, I can speak the language, I've got family there, I've got family there, and they're going to hook me up with a hotel and tons of benefits?
One of the other things that I was speaking to someone in France about recently is that in European countries it's a lot harder for people who are undocumented to find work. In France they require ID cards for working in sort of anything from a hand car wash to anything else. In the United Kingdom, I think, thankfully, we don't ask for that sort of papers, please society, but also that does make us a more attractive market for people to come to if they are undocumented. But it is interesting. We're talking about the numbers that have been surging, and certainly the small boats have been surging. But those arriving on lorries, that's gone down massively.
Why is that? Because we've got better at finding them.
We have built a maze-like infrastructure around the port of Calais. We've got barbed wire fences after ditches, after divots, after patrolled areas. I mean, the fortification of that port has been enormous. And to some extent, that hasn't ended the problem. It's pushed the problem down the beaches.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, it's a huge problem, and Tom, we think we'll probably get some guidance from will it be the Home Secretary this afternoon.
We will get word from number 10.
Right.
I'll be getting that after midday. Well, perhaps we would expect to be able to report that around 12:30, maybe 12:45.
Well, that would be with Mark and Pip, of course. So stay tuned to GB News, because we're going to keep you up to date on this major story. The government Stop the Boats policy has been dubbed unlawful by the Court of Appeal.
Thank you, Tom. The US Coast Guard says that presumed human remains have been recovered from the wreckage of the Titan submersible that imploded earlier this month, killing all 5 people on board.
Medical officials are analysing the remains, which were discovered when debris from the craft was retrieved from the ocean floor only yesterday.
Let's get the thoughts of retired submarine captain Ryan Ramsey. Good morning, Ryan. I think, first of all, we were so surprised that they recovered any sort of debris, and then even more shocked at the suggestion that some of the bodies of these individuals have been retrieved.
Good morning. So I'm less surprised that they found the debris. They had remote operating vehicles already down there, so it's a case of could they recover that debris and bring it up, which they've managed to do successfully. I, like you too, am very surprised that they found human remains within that debris, and that'll be for coroners to look at and identify. I think the reality is they'll work out what happened from the debris that they've got and hopefully give some closure to this tragic event.
Because what we don't know the details yet, do we? But Ryan, there is a suggestion now that the submersible had been unloading some of its ballast, which suggests that perhaps they knew they were in trouble, whereas the original suggestion was it would have been instant and they'd have known nothing about it.
Yes, so they might have known they were in trouble. However, they would have thought at that point that there was a recoverable situation. The moment of implosion was less than 4 milliseconds, and the brain can't comprehend anything that quick, so they just wouldn't have known anything about it, and therefore didn't suffer any pain during that final phase.
I'm just thinking about the water pressure involved, Ryan, and the scale of the implosion. It does make you really sceptical that there are human remains that they've been able to recover.
Yes, I agree. I think at 3,800 metres, the pressure's roughly 400 bar, and roughly where they believe that this imploded, the pressure would be about 200 bar. And if you want to put that in perspective, a lorry tyre is 10 bar. So you can imagine that's a huge amount of pressure. What is surprising is how much of the hull has survived intact. That didn't go to smaller pieces.
And so do we presume then, Ryan, that the implosion was where these two separate metals were connected? Is it carbon fibre and titanium, and therefore there was a weakness point?
Yes, I believe that's the case, but it's for a maritime investigation, accident investigation board to work it out. I mean, they're dissimilar metals, so they're not alike, these carbon fibre and titanium, and therefore there's always going to be a weakness at that particular joint. And if you think that it had been down to the Titanic 3 times before, each time it goes down to the Titanic with 400 bar of pressure, it puts those joints at huge exposure and to degradation. And so unless they've got really good maintenance regimes, or they're analysing those joints and the states of the materials, eventually this is going to happen.
Yeah. Ryan, always nice to talk to you, and really illuminating, actually. Retired submarine captain Ryan Ramsey there.
Ryan was one we were talking to last week,
Yeah.
of course, and I said, you've used the word tragedy. This was before, 2 days before they'd been found. He said, there's absolutely no hope. He was quite clear, wasn't he?
Yeah.
A great tragedy, of course, and still devastating, particularly to lose your 19-year-old son and your husband.
Awful. Right, still to come, one of Britain's most celebrated Olympians, Sir Steve Redgrave. He won gold medals, of course, at 5 consecutive Olympic Games from 1984 to 2000 in a rowing boat. He's going to join us next. first and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:23. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, thousands of spectators are gathering this week. It's Henley Royal Regatta. The rowers are battling it out on the Thames. Of course, the spectators are doing a little bit more action in the Pimm's tent. So joining us now is retired rower and Olympian gold medalist, Sir Steve Redgrave. Good morning, Steve. Great to see you. Right, we want to talk to you about the state of Britain's rivers. You've, as we said, 5 Olympic gold medals, 1984 to 2000. You spent more time on the River Thames, Steve, than most people would ever do in a lifetime. What kind of changes have you seen in the quality of the water in all of that time? How bad is it now?
If you go back to the 70s when I first started the sport, I think the rivers were in a much worse state than they are now. They still need to be improved. We still need to move forward. Is that I've been brought up in Marlow in Buckinghamshire on the River Thames, started rowing in 1976. And when my father was a kid in that area, there used to be salmon coming up the river. We have salmon ladders at all the weirs so they can get back to their spawning grounds along the Thames. But it's taken a very slow process, and of course, there is still a lot of pollution that does need to be cleared up. We're moving in the right direction, but it still needs to be pushed forward to be able to be much better.
So you're part of a new campaign group, actually, aren't you? River Action UK. Is one of the problems as well that some of the water treatment plants need modernising? We need investment in our water system so that the rivers can remain clean, even on heavy rain days.
Yeah, of us at Henley Royal Regatta, we're supporting River Action UK, and that yes, there is investment needed. There is of processes that need to be put in place. That we need to push forward on these things to be able to create there. But actually, you do see a hell of a lot of good wildlife, of opportunities for swans, geese, fish, birds around the area that. And we do see quite a lot of swimmers, maybe during regatta time a little bit too many that we would like when we're trying to run a regatta. But the water quality does need to improve. And so us at Henley Royal Regatta are pushing our weight behind of making sure that we can move forward to improve the quality water throughout the UK, but especially the Thames for us.
Yeah, Steve, a lot of people watching, listening will thinking, yeah, rivers, OK, the quality may have improved since the 70s, but we know some of these water companies are chucking effluents and sewage into the rivers, and that's putting people off. I mean, if you fell in the river for a prolonged period of River Thames, is it going to make you sick?
I gave up rowing many years ago after the Sydney Olympics in 2000. But I have taken up canoeing, and I canoe down at Marlow at Longridge, and there is a water treatment plant on that stretch of the river there, and there are deposits that are let out every now and again, which you can smell. You can certainly see the difference in the colour of water at different times, and it's much easier to fall out of a canoe than it is to fall out of a rowing boat. And there's certain stretches of that I have to concentrate really hard because I spend more time swimming than I do canoeing. But there's areas that I do not want to fall out the boat because of the sewage. But me personally, I've never had any ill effects.
Tell us about Henley Royal Regatta, Steve. I shall be there tomorrow. It's a huge event still on the sporting, but also the social calendar, isn't it? How many years has it been going for now? It must be one of the oldest events that we have in this country.
148 years, older than the FA Cup, older than Wimbledon, on an annual basis, apart from 2 world wars and 1 year of COVID.
Amazing, amazing.
What's the great appeal, do you think, Steve? Why has it got such an enduring popularity?
The riverways are talking about. Riverways are so important in the UK that there are what used to be the transport system of the country of travelling goods around of the area. So all our big cities are on rivers, and that big universities tend to be in big cities and on rivers. So there is a very big tradition of rowing at university level. Wherever nowadays that there is a waterway in the UK that's rowable, a lake, a river, a canal, there is a rowing community. If you go back 184 years when the regatta started, Henley-on-Thames, the town itself, the business folk of Henley wanted to increase the popularity of the area and trying to bring revenue into the town. So they started the regatta. Then a few years later, the rowers took over control of it. And we were very lucky we were the last regatta before the end of school breakup and university breakup. And so when there was very difficult transport of moving boats around, is that take the colleges at Oxford and Cambridge, is that all the old traditional races along the river one weekend would have their regatta. The colleges would come down and row, race on the Saturday, party on the Saturday evening. And then the only way to then move their boats to the next regatta was on the Sunday morning of rowing their boats to the next regatta. And they would move down and up the river each week, go back and study during the week, and then come back and do the same thing again. And then that would finish here at Henley. So my town of Marlow is the last regatta 2 weeks before Henley Royal Regatta. And so it sort of and Reading was the other side. So that combination. And so of being the chair and the organiser, we were positioned really well from that process. But the colour of the infrastructure, the celebration of the sport, we have the Stewards Enclosure, which is really a reunion centre in some ways of people that have rowed at the regatta. Schools, colleges, clubs, international have their opportunity of owning. So if you're going to celebrate the sport, this tends to be the week to celebrate. Yes, there's a lot of rowing. There's 6 days of racing, over 400 races, and it's a lot of fun, a lot of excitement, a lot of socialising. It's on the social calendar for the UK. It's one of those things that gets a lot of publicity, all for the right reasons. And there's a lot of people that love the river, love rowing, that are here to celebrate this week.
We're looking at a picture of you on screen, Steve. You on the right of the front of the boat. I think I'd know this. I don't know if it's the front of the back with Matt Pinson, probably several years ago now. Do you row this week? Do you take part in one of the veterans events?
Veterans Henley's next weekend, and I won't be in that one. And I'm not fit enough, fast enough, and I've got my senses that I don't want to put myself through that pain anymore. I'm in my 60s now, so I think I've done my fair share, especially rowing up and down this stretch.
Okay.
But I did venture out. We do have celebration rows over the weekend of past winners. I think we've got a crew that are in their 90s that won 50 years ago.
Amazing.
That are celebrating. But I did one of them last year of 40 years when I won my first Henley medal with a guy that I rowed with. It was pretty gruesome to watch, but the crowd seemed to like it at the lunch break that we sort of have got out there in a boat.
Fantastic. Steve, thank you so much for joining us on GB News. I might catch up with you tomorrow.
The world's most celebrated Olympian.
World's most celebrated Olympian.
Consecutive gold medals at 5 consecutive Olympics. I don't think that record will ever be beaten.
No. Right, lots more to come this morning. We're going to be looking at the Just Stop Oil protesters, what they've been up to now, after your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 11:33. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Scotland's former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has told the COVID-19 inquiry that the Scottish Government didn't accept the worst-case scenario of the pandemic. Ms Sturgeon's being questioned on how prepared Scotland was, as well as how she handled the pandemic. She added that learning from it is of critical importance. The Court of Appeal has ruled the government policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. It follows calls from individual asylum seekers and the charity Asylum Aid to challenge a previous High Court ruling. 2 of the 3 judges today found the East African nation was not a safe country, with the presiding judge, Lord Burnett, saying asylum seekers are at risk of inhumane treatment. The Rwandan government, though, claims it's one of the safest countries in the world. Boris Johnson's allies have been criticised by the Privileges Committee for what it describes as undermining the House of Commons procedures. They include Nadine Dorris, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. The Privileges Committee report 2 weeks ago found the former Prime Minister had repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID breaches in Number 10. The inquiry now says MPs should consider whether their actions could be a contempt of Parliament and what further action to take. A police officer is being investigated for murder after fatally shooting a teenager during a traffic stop in Paris. People took to the streets across France to protest against the killing for a second night, shooting fireworks at police and setting cars alight. Over 150 people have been arrested so far. Speaking at the start of a crisis meeting with senior ministers earlier, French President Emmanuel Macron called the violence unjustifiable. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2642 and €1.15579. The price of gold is £1,507.62 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,481 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yeah.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
To
You
GB
are very cross about the
News.
Court of Appeal ruling, aren't they?
They really are. Patricia said, I think this immigration thing is rotten to the core. Send the boats back. Don't let them land on GB territory.
Yeah. Peter says, if these illegal migrants risk persecution in Rwanda and it's unsafe, then I think the British people should threaten persecution, thus make it unsafe to come here. I don't think we can do that, Peter. Although I understand your frustration, but I don't think we can really do that.
Richard says, I'm really angry about today's outcome ruling of the Rwanda policy. Our country cannot cope with any more asylum seekers. Adrian makes a great point. If Rwanda is an unsafe country, why do Arsenal have it on their shirts? Visit Rwanda.
Do you know, I've already tweeted that. That's a very good point. And David says, my heart sinks at the very thought. I hate to use the word referendum, but if the public were given the chance to have the choice via the immigration policy, then the courts would, I believe, have no choice but to keep out of it. Yes.
Yeah, on and on and on. Rob, what a farce, this judgment this morning. Open-door immigration is now nailed on. It seems the government is powerless to control our borders. They've just joined the Reform Party, they say.
Right, just going to go back to the Lord's test match, because 3 Stop Oil protesters were arrested yesterday after throwing orange powder or pitch onto the day one of the second test, and the fantastic cricketers literally just chucked them off the pitch, which is what we want.
Absolutely. Day 2 is resumed at 10 o'clock this morning, and Ben Stokes promises his England side will fight back from their 2-wicket defeat to Australia. GB News' national reporter Ellie Costello is at Lord's Cricket Ground for us now. Ellie, what's the mood there like this morning? I imagine that security has ramped up a bit for looking out for any maniacs with orange powder.
Yes, absolutely. Good morning to you both. The Marylebone Cricket Club that owns Lord's Cricket Ground, they have really ramped up security. They're going to have to continue to ramp up security for the rest of this test. And just behind me now, there are some turnstiles. I had a chat to security at those turnstiles this morning, and I asked what has changed in the past 24 hours. They say that security has always been tight here, but there are additional checks taking place today. They said that everybody's bags are going to be checked. Every single person is going to be patted down from head to toe, which I can actually say I've witnessed standing here for the past few hours, and everybody is going to be scanned over with a metal detector, because of course there have been questions about how those Just Stop Oil protesters made their way through security yesterday when everybody's bag is supposed to be checked. They had that orange powder with them, didn't they? And we saw the scenes yesterday when 2 of those protesters made their way onto the field. They got that powder everywhere, and then one of them was carried off in just spectacular fashion. So I spoke to spectators and members here this morning about their reaction to that scene yesterday.
I understand the cause, but if you're going to do it, go after the sports wash companies that are owned by Saudi Arabia, like sheikhs, like Man City, Newcastle United. I understand the cause, but it's not helping.
Splendid. It looked like he'd pre-planned it, to be honest. I mean, I know he's a rugby player, so I think he did it with ease, and thankfully didn't get injured. But yeah, it was very impressive stuff.
I thought he did what GB News does, representing Britain at its best. It's absolute disgrace, and he handled it brilliantly.
I thought it was brilliant, to be honest with you. I think it just did everything what people inside was all wanted to do. Just get them off the pitch and let us get on with the game. Although I understand what they're protesting about, etc. I get that. I don't want to. I think they can do other ways of doing this, etc. They're only going to alienate themselves.
Yeah. There has been a lot of humour in the queue this morning as well. Many asking if they could join Just Stop Oil in their ticket ballot. They said they always seem to be very, very successful at getting the best seats at these sorts of events. And yesterday they were sat in the grandstand, tickets at £150. So yeah, nice work if you can get it. But security has been ramped up today, and you can hear the applause in there. Really, England, 2 wickets already down this morning. They're doing well.
Thank you, Ellie. Ellie Costello there. Right, back to our papers this morning. Political editor of the Daily Express, Sam Lister, TV commentator.
And doesn't it tell you all you need to know? £150 tickets because they're middle-class twits.
I can't possibly agree.
Yeah. No, of course you can't.
They're Just Stop Oil protesters.
Yeah,
not even the cricket
fans.
No,
the Just Stop Oil protesters. No, definitely not the cricket fans.
That's why you look so shocked. I was horrified. She's used to you saying such shocking things now. She just...
But you agree with me? Just Stop Oil protesters. They're all middle class.
They're trust fund based.
They are.
Or
the trustafarians.
They get you to work.
Yeah, exactly.
are.
Why aren't they?
But also,
exactly.
I mean, I don't know anything about cricket, Andrew.
Nor do I.
Probably like you. But I did think Johnny Bairstow lifting up that fella.
Brilliant,
That was
wasn't it?
fantastic. That's exactly what we want to see, isn't it?
We'd like the police,
cheers.
we'd like the police to do that, because that's what the police do in France.
Yes, they do it everywhere. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the water cannon. Is it in France where they water cannon as well?
Now, what have you
with a
picked?
bear hug.
Well, I've picked to do the NHS consult.
I love this story. It's enraging.
Do you know what? It was enraging enough they're going on strike. And we find out today, on the front of the Daily Mail, that the days that they're on strike, they can do private work. So there's going to be no pain for
They're already earning £126,000 a year on average.
No, they're earning on average £128,000
Right.
a year. And you can nearly double that because the majority of them do private healthcare work, 1 or 2 days a week. What I didn't know until yesterday was that their pension top-up from the government is 20%. Can you believe that?
Yeah, that's right.
All the rest of the NHS workers get something like 12%. They get 20%. Plus, on top of all of that, the law was changed last year, if you remember, for the pension scheme, where they were allowed to earn more than quid to stop them retiring at 50. So all these provisions are being made, and yet they're going to go on strike. This, to me, who is it today? They called it naked greed. This really is, if you go into the medical profession, if you go into a profession where life-saving is your job, how on earth, when you've been paying shed loads of money, can you walk out on people?
And it's meant to be a vocation, Carol.
Well, no, I don't necessarily agree that. I think you should be paid for what you do handsomely.
Well, they are.
When you're saving people's lives and you have this massive responsibility. But they are paid handsomely.
Yeah, they are.
And I spoke to a consultant yesterday and I said to him, you know, this country paid for you guys to be trained. He said, no, we paid for it ourselves. I said, no, you didn't. You paid tuition fees at university, which every student does. But you were paid, but taxpayers paid for you to be trained. How dare you do this? You're attacking society's most vulnerable people. And they think it's OK to do that.
You know what? The other thing that occurred to me, Sam, when I saw that the doctors can continue to do private work on these strike days, that means the people who can afford to pay for it will get treatment.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. But also, the Daily Mail makes the very good point that actually these people who are going out on strike, they're actually going to make a profit being out on strike.
Yeah.
You know, they're not losing a day's pay. Obviously, most people who go out on strike, you have to weigh up the decision between taking this action and you know, harming yourself in the pocket. Actually, these guys, they're going to make more money working for the private sector.
This negates the whole principle of unionism. You're supposed to protect people. So this is attacking people who aren't wealthy.
But this is such an own goal by the consultants.
But you see, you say that, but you know, the BMA...
And the BMA.
The BMA's been taken over by militants.
Yeah.
And one of the guys who's organising this strike, whose name I've just forgotten there, but I should remember because I want to name him, he actually yesterday called all Brexiteers racists. Can you believe that?
Mike Henley.
Yeah.
He's the deputy chairman of the consultants committee.
What's Brexit got to do with the BMA?
Exactly. But it always comes back to Brexit.
It always says
everything
we
always.
get blamed for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just shows what a kind of sneery attitude.
It's just awful for the consumer of healthcare needs, isn't it? Daniel Korski, Sam, should we? He's dropped out of the race to be Conservative mayoral candidate. These allegations against him very serious. What's happened here? What's gone on?
I think this is, I mean, honestly, Conservative, headquarters, they've really messed up. These allegations have been around for a long time.
Right.
And in the vetting process, they've obviously clearly failed. Well, I think they were willfully blind to these allegations. Now, you know...
He's alleged to have groped.
He's alleged to have groped.
TV executive 10 years ago.
In number 10, in 10 Downing Street.
Where he worked under Cameron.
Exactly. Now, there are massive issues here because there are issues about, women being believed. There are issues about men should have a right to a fair kind of trial or, you know, a proper investigation. So there's two different sides to that. At the heart of it, though, the Conservative Party machine should have seen this coming a mile off because everybody knew about it
they did.
In their gang.
Right.
And so they've basically allowed this to happen and it could have all been seen off very quickly and I just think they've been very naive.
Can I just make a point about this as well? Martha Carney yesterday had Daisy Goodwin on the Today programme and she asked her quite a perfectly legitimate question and she said to her, are you certain that your recollections are correct?
Yes, because he's denied it, of course.
Because he has denied it. And she said, she was furious, Daisy Goodwin. She said, you're basically suggesting I'm making this up. No, she wasn't. She was asking a perfectly legitimate question. And Daisy Goodwin and all the women's equality groups are saying this is why women don't come forward and report abuse, whatever. No, it isn't. You can't... if a woman alleges something, she can't just automatically be believed because she's a woman. I mean, that is just not fair. We know that, I'm not saying Daisy Goodwin is lying, I'm sure exactly what she said is correct. However, we do know that women lie. We know that women go to court and accuse men of abuse and rape and are found out of vengeance. Women cannot have the automatic right to be believed.
This is what I don't get, Carol, is why would she make this public now?
Yes,
if this happened 10 years ago.
Well, she wrote about it before in 2017, but she didn't name him. And she says she's naming him now because he's running for high office.
Well, that's ridiculous. If she was worried about the well-being of other women for the last 10 years, she should have made the allegation at the time.
And she suggested as well that other women would come forward, and they haven't so far.
Well, this morning I read a piece somewhere that said 3 people have told her, but she's not named those people.
No.
She's not said. That's the thing. But I think Bev is exactly right here. You know, if it was about protecting women, come forward at the time. Don't come forward to stop a guy getting a job just because you don't like him.
That's what it looks like, isn't it?
He was never going to win anyway, and of course he was the arch remainer. He was an architect of Project Fear when he was at number 10, and he also was huge in trying to stop Boris Johnson curbing the rights of Uber. So he would have alienated every black cab driver in London, would have said, oi, you're not going to vote for that Daniel Korski, are you?
But the point is, isn't it, that you know, when a woman makes allegations, I'm not specifically talking about Daisy Goodwin here, but, you know, a man's career, his reputation, his life is at stake here.
Yeah.
So if you're making... anyone who makes an unfounded allegation, you're ruining a life.
Let's remember as well, and he's a married man.
Yes.
He's got a very high-powered wife who was private secretary. God help her, that job.
Well,
So the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for 8 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a former ambassador to Albania, a very serious woman, and so this is hugely embarrassing for her too.
What does it also mean for the mayoral candidates? Sam?
Well, I mean, I think it's like they'd given up before they'd even started. Even in picking, even in putting him on the selection, they weeded out Paul Scully, who is not a household name. I'm sure he would even admit that, but he was probably the most
minister.
But he's probably the most high profile of all the candidates. They weeded him out, and they were left with people who nobody's ever heard of, who were never going to be able to fight against Sadiq Khan. I mean, if you're gonna actually seriously fight this contest, put up somebody who's got a serious chance of winning.
And it's so winnable for the Conservatives because Sadiq Khan is expanding his ultra-low emission zone, which is hated. Every London borough it will cover. That will
knife crime, record knife crime.
Rampant
nothing works. You can't drive down the road without being a traffic jam.
And he's the police
it's
and
an
crime
easy win.
commissioner. It is, if they had a decent candidate. I tell you who I think could run for it.
Who?
Boris Johnson.
Yes.
Oh, well.
Throw your hat back in the ring. What an idea. He did it before. He won it twice.
I don't think he wants the hard work.
No. Well, it doesn't have to be too hard work.
He can earn enough on the speech circuit.
He can still go and make his speeches.
He's got his lovely Daily Mail column on a Saturday.
He would.
It's
And
very well remunerated.
Sadiq Khan would be a very worried man if Boris was the candidate.
Yes, he would. He'd have to be, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
He really would.
Yeah.
Carol, I love this story. Women are born hunters and not just homemakers, say scientists.
I read this story. I was blooming cheering in the cab on the way in. This just says that we've always believed women just stayed at home and put the
I've never thought that about you, Malone.
No, well, but this is
funny that
there's so many women out. This is what they're saying that women. This was a study done of women between 1888 and 2020. Say they were just as likely to be big game hunters. They would go out on their own and shoot things, and they would wrestle with the animals. And they're just saying that they used the weapons. They had strategies. Men would go out alone. Women would plan things. I love this. They took everybody down. Every bit as vicious and as...
I believe that.
This could rewrite everything. This could rewrite what we think about men and women, Sam. The hunter-gatherer versus the forager.
Exactly, and I'm very, very pro this. And I do like the fact that it does talk about strategies. Men out there with brute force, women being clever.
But I thought men just dragged women around by their hair in those days and did everything.
It says that they were using knives, bows, nets, machetes, spears and crossbows.
Probably all at the same time because we were multitasking whilst also breastfeeding, giving birth, keeping the cave clean as well.
And planning that night's dinner.
And then having to cook the stuff
that
they killed.
And then straight up the next morning and out with your spear again. I think it's great.
Women's lib started very early then.
Didn't it?
Yes, I think a lot of us have inherited those genes, actually.
Oh, well,
Sam,
definitely.
You think so?
I would like to think I'm a hunter.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
Right, so we just finish on a very quick one. We can't. We've not got time. I know, I'm sorry.
Quick prediction. the government will appeal Rwanda.
Yeah. My prediction is they will go to the Supreme Court.
And they should.
And absolutely should. Absolutely. And the country is cheering them on to go.
Yeah, I think they are. I think they are.
Yeah.
Right, Sam Lister, Carol Malone, always a pleasure, as always. We have come to the end of our week, have we?
We have.
We have, great. That's it from Britain's Newsroom. I don't know what day it is. Coming up next live is the Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. Have a great weekend.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. You probably noticed a fresher feel out there today. Many places dry and bright with some late June sunshine. Just a few showers scattered about across the north. Now, we started with some wet weather across the southeast from this weather front, still affecting parts of Kent and East Anglia, but it is starting to ebb away and will be gone by mid-afternoon at the latest. But clearing away from the London area already, and we do have some showers further north, some heavy ones likely this afternoon over eastern Scotland, perhaps far northeast of England, one or two across the Highlands and the Western Isles, and the odd one scattered across northern England, but most places dry, bright, with temperatures close to average, so a fresher, less humid feel compared to yesterday. We could still get up to 23, maybe 24 across the southeast. As we go through this evening, we'll see more showers coming into the northwest, a little bit breezy here as well, but the heavier showers over eastern Scotland should tend to fade, and then most places will be dry for most of the evening, and then more rain starts to creep its way in, this time into parts of Wales and southwest England. Temperatures dropping down to about 11 to 14 Celsius, so a reasonably comfortable night. We'll start off dry and bright across eastern areas tomorrow, but it'll be a dull, damp start for Northern Ireland, Wales and southwest England, and the rain will spread more widely across Scotland into northern England too. Perhaps not much of it getting to eastern areas, mostly here staying dry, but it will cloud over almost everywhere, and the rain should perhaps ease off across parts of Wales as we go through the day. It won't be as warm in the southeast, but again, temperatures mostly high teens across the north, low 20s further south. But generally a fairly dull and damp end to the working week. There'll be further outbreaks of rain and drizzle across many areas, particularly western Scotland and northwest England, staying fairly soggy. But into the weekend, although it'll be wet and windy at times across northern Scotland, elsewhere most places bright and breezy, not too many showers and some sunny spells.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before
and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
The government's Rwanda policy ruled unlawful. Asylum seekers and charities win a legal challenge in the Royal Courts of Justice over sending refugees to the East African country. Is the next stop the Supreme Court?
Named and shamed. Allies of Boris Johnson, including Priti Patel and Jacob Rees-Mogg, are slammed by the Privileges Committee for undermining their report into Partygate. They're accused of using unprecedented and coordinated pressure. Could they now be forced to apologise?
Flames, explosions and widespread unrest across France after a 17-year-old is shot dead by police in Paris. 150 people arrested so far. 40,000 police now deployed. We'll have the latest from Paris.
And a royal price to pay. Rising inflation sees King Charles tightening his belt as he, just like the rest of us, is hit by this cost of living crisis. Before we start, your headlines with Rhiannon.
Pip, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. Nicola Sturgeon has told the COVID-19 inquiry that Scotland had no plan for a non-flu pandemic and that learning from it is of critical importance. The former First Minister is being questioned on how prepared Scotland was, as well as how she handled the pandemic. She also told the inquiry the government she led did its best, but admitted it didn't get everything right. Ms Sturgeon was asked whether the plan was inadequate.
There was no set plan, which, as I say, is not the same as saying there was no thinking into how we dealt with a pandemic that had features and characteristics of flu in terms of transmissibility, but also the severity and what we came to understand in terms of the asymptomatic transmission of COVID-19. So I would readily accept that there was a gap in terms of the pandemic we ultimately were dealing with.
The Court of Appeal has ruled the government policy to send asylum seekers to Rwanda is unlawful. It follows calls from individual asylum seekers and the charity Asylum Aid to challenge a previous High Court ruling. 2 of the 3 judges found the East African nation was not a safe country, with the presiding judge, Lord Burnett, saying asylum seekers are at risk of inhumane treatment. The Rwandan government claims it's one of the safest countries in the world. Lord Burnett says asylum seekers, as I said there, are at risk of inhumane treatment.
Deficiencies in the asylum system in Rwanda are such that there are substantial grounds for believing that there is a real risk that persons sent to Rwanda will be returned to their home countries where they faced persecution or other inhumane treatment when in fact they have a good claim for asylum. In that sense, Rwanda is not a safe third country.
Boris Johnson's allies have been criticised by the Privileges Committee for what it describes as undermining the House of Commons procedures. They include Nadine Dorries, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg and Priti Patel. The Privileges Committee report 2 weeks ago found the former Prime Minister had repeatedly misled Parliament over COVID breaches in Number 10. The inquiry now says MPs should consider whether their actions could be a contempt of Parliament and what further action to take. Thames Water says it's working with shareholders to secure extra cash as ministers draw up contingency plans.